Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Dirty Gaming, and a new video on the channel going through an updated version of the Omniscience Tornado Shot Deadeye. The main reason for this is I transitioned to Tornado Shot about a week into the league, and a lot of the gear that I bought was cheap at the time, and it's now super expensive. And a lot of the items I think are too expensive for what they bring to the build unless you're really looking to super juice your maps. A lot of the stuff is just too expensive for sort of a mid-game Tornado Shot character. So, if any of you have watched any of my videos before or kept track of my character, you know it had quite a lot of expensive items on it. So the build that we're going to run through is dropping the expensive cluster jewels, the onslaught ring, the forbidden jewels, expensive essence of loathing boots, awakened GMP, divergent inspiration, and all the plus arrow gear. Now, even with dropping all of this, to get a character that I think can comfortably do maps, invitations, things like that, you're still probably talking 30 to 40 divines. Now, it depends. If you craft yourself, you can get it cheap, probably even cheaper than 30. If you want to buy everything from trade, it's probably going to be 35 to 40 divines. So the character that's going to be shown in the video footage is the POB that's going to be in the description. So it is this character, and it performs really well. It's melting Guardians and Conquerors really quickly. It feels tanky enough mapping. It gets map bosses down quick, and it does very well in Sanctum. So the way the video is going to work, I'm not going to go through how to craft the gear because it makes the videos too long. I'm just going to go for what stats you want to look for. But within the POB, there will be a crafting section in the notes which will tell you exactly how to craft or what to look for when you're buying these items, along with the rough cost that you can expect to pay. Now, obviously, with any video, sometimes it increases prices of certain items, but there isn't really anything that's specific on this build other than a few jewels that won't go up because there's lots of them available. So if you do look to buy items and they're way more than what's quoted in the video, I would look into crafting it yourself because it will be cheaper than the costs I've listed. So if the sale prices goes up, then it's definitely going to be cheaper to craft it yourself. And most of the crafting is just essences with some meta crafting. And in general, it's nothing complicated. It's all deterministic. And it should all be fairly straightforward for anyone to follow. Now, I have seen Omniscience versions of Tornado Shot that are done cheaper, like with a few divines worth of gear, and I have seen non-Omniscience versions get to decent DPS as well. The purpose of this is to try and have a balance of everything. So we want defenses, we want quality of life, we want speed, and we want damage, and we want to balance that as well as possible, which is how I've come up with this version of the build. So what we're going to do first is go through the gear and the gem links. And as I say, if you want to know how to craft the gear, it's going to be all in the path of building. So in terms of the gear I've got on this character, I have, let's get the relic out of the way first, a crit multi relic. So this gives a little bit of damage because it's 30% crit multi. This could be any relic you've got that benefits the build, whether it's, more armor, evasion, movement speed, attack speed, crit multi, crit chance, anything you've got that just adds any benefit to the build. And if you don't have one, it's not the end of the world. So we'll start with the actual gear. So first is the bow. Cost is going to be around 5 to 7 divines, depending if you craft or buy it. And you're essentially simply looking for 1,000 or more LE DPS, crit chance, and attack speed. So for the helmet, you want mana reservation, efficiency skills as an implicit, but rolling with the lowest cost orbs should be okay. You need mana cost of attacks rolling with greater orbs, and then you're just looking for anything that helps the build. So life, suppression, resistances, stats. Most important thing, open prefix to craft fizz taken as fire. For your body armor, this is just a 6 link with lots of life resistances. And then again, an open prefix to craft more fizz taken as Ellie. And then as your implicits, you want determination, aura effect, and non-curse auras from your skills. The quiver, this is fairly cheap. I've been trying to sell this for like a divine for about a week and it hasn't sold. So a similar quiver should be nice and cheap. I would look to get a fractured prod speed base. They're really cheap. And then the stats you're looking for are damage of bows, crit multi, and then you want an open suffix to craft the frenzy and crit mod. Your 2 rings, you want to be amethyst rings, and then you want at least double attributes, so intelligence dex or dex and strength with life, and you want an open prefix on both rings to craft mana cost. That's it. No more difficult than that. For your gloves, you can ignore the suppression. You are going to need to get suppression probably in 1 bit of gear, but it doesn't have to be on the gloves. Again, I would just get a cheap fractured attack speed base and then roll it until you get life and resistances or life and attributes. And then for your implicits, you are going to want spell suppression. I've got a really high mod. I've got like exceptional. You could just roll with greater and you'd be fine. And I've got rage on hit, which I roll with grand. Again, you could roll it with greater, or you could just go attack speed. The boots are where we save a lot of money from my build because we don't need to roll these with loathing essences. All you're going to do is buy a fractured movement speed base, which are 5 to 10 chaos, and then you're basically going to spam life essences. All you need is an open suffix to craft avoid elemental ailments, and I would try and make sure that your last suffix is either attributes or a resistance. If you can get suppression, great. As I said, you've got to get it somewhere, but we don't need to find a huge amount. And then we move on to the belt. This is a synthesized 18% dex belt. You can get dex, int, or strength. And then you're just looking to get double attributes, life, and an open prefix to craft either armor and evasion or ele damage with attacks. And that's it for the gear. It's all fairly straightforward, other than obviously omniscience. I've got Art of the Gladiator as my anoint because I like the attack speed and I like the extra movement speed. There's lots of different anoints that are kind of similar damage. So your best bet is to put your specific build into POB and just see what it says is the most DPS anointment. The flasks are just Quicksilver, Granite, Jade, Diamond, all with the suffix that helps the flask. So Diamond has crit, Jade has evasion, Granite has armor, and then I've got attack speed on my Quicksilver. These are the 4 I would recommend to roll. It's up to you whether you maybe change attack speed for less curse effects, but I really, really like a high tier attack speed roll. And that's kind of the gear. It still gets you plenty of arrows, even though we're not adding any extra into the build. So I'll go through the gem links that I'd recommend for this sort of budget. So I've just gone with a 6-socket 5-link bow because I didn't want to spend like whatever it is, 1.5, 2 divines to buy the fusings to link it, because it's not going to make or break the build. I'm already melting bosses quick enough. And the only time you're going to need to put your totems down is on bosses. So the links in my totems are Inspiration and Ballista Totem, Tornado Shot, GMP, and then Focus Ballista. In the helmet, we've got a life tap linked to Sniper's Mark and Mark on Hit. And then we've just got a Flame Dash. In the gloves, I've got a Cast and Damage Taken Molten Shell. You can set these at whatever level you feel works best for you. I go for 6 and 13. You might want to go a little bit less. We've got Vitality, which is not being used. That was on my old build. I don't use that. And we've got 2020 Defiance Banner. And then in my boots are the auras. So just got Enlighten level 3. These are about 100C. Precision, Grace, and Determination. Precision, I'll try and get 21 because it just pushes your accuracy closer to cap or to cap if you're not quite there. That's it for those gem links. And then we'll just go through the main 6 link, which I'm running Tornado Shot, Standard GMP, Inspiration, Awaken Daily Damage with attacks. If you can't afford it, just run the normal one. Trinity Support, and Increase Crit Damage. So essentially this gear, is none of it's particularly expensive. None of it is difficult to craft. And without the plus arrows, it makes the bow and the quiver so much cheaper. So let's go into the jewels because this is where the major change happens. So the first thing I've done is I've dropped Lethal Pride and I'm going Brutal Restraint. Mainly because I've dropped my Onslaught on hit ring. So I need to get Onslaught. I like getting it from a Brutal Restraint. So if we go through the jewel, you can see there's lots of attributes that are handy for the build. The only mandatory one is Onslaught on Kill. But you get stuff here. We've got 5% Dexterity. Here's the Onslaught on Kill for 8 seconds. Crit Strike Chance, Movement Speed, Increased Life, Increased Projectile Damage. There's loads and loads of good mods that you can get. And these jewels are cheap. I paid 31 Chaos for this one. And it's got loads and loads of good mods that suit the build. Now, for the rest of the jewels, we're giving up, as I said, Forbidden Flame, and we're just not going Far Shot. So we go in Gathering Winds, Focal Point, Ricochet, and Endless Munitions. If you purely want a map, Far Shot might be better than Focal Point, but this adds a lot of damage on bosses, so it really helps for those tough situations like maybe the end of Sanctum. You want to get Final Form Lycia down before she does her Lightning Phase. Far Shot is going to be less effective than Focal Point, so that's the way I've gone. So the first major change is we're now running Secrets of Suffering. So we're not going to chill, shock, or ignite, but we are going to inflict Brittle, which increases the crit chance, Scorch, which increases the ele damage that an enemy takes, and Sapped, which stops enemies doing as much damage to you. They're all really handy, and they're all really easy to cap quite high, which I'll go through in the skill tree, because there's a couple of important nodes that you have to take. So we have our Secrets of Suffering. Along with that, we've got a Watcher's Eye, which is basically just increased attack speed while affected by precision. I just went for the cheapest Watcher's Eye that you could get. These are about 45C. Ignore the Vitality mod. This is for my actual build. This is not going to have any effect because I've taken Vitality out. If you can, I'd go for Precision Damage. It's about a Divine. For a halfly decent roll one, it is more DPS than attack speed. And then the rest of the jewels. This is where the build changes up quite a bit. We're running 3 Grand Spectrums, and they're not any of the mega expensive ones. So we're running 7% elemental resistance per Grand Spectrum. These are about 45C. We're running 12% chance to avoid elemental ailments per Grand Spectrum. These are about 100 to 110C. And then I'm running increased LE damage per Grand Spectrum. These are a bit more at just over a Divine. But for these 3 jewels, we get 45% increased elemental damage. We get 36% chance to avoid elemental ailments, and then we get 21% to all elemental resistances. This is what makes the gearing so much cheaper because we don't have to balance our Omni and our resistances as much, and we also don't need to craft our boots with deafening essences of loathing because they're like 12 chaos each. You might spam through 20 or 30 before you get a pair of boots that you like, and that is a lot of currency. So you need 44% from boots. So it's going to be 20% from your greater implicit, then roll 24 or 25% on your boots. That will give you a total of 44%. You get 20 from the tree down here, which means we need 36%, which is exactly this jewel times 3. It then frees up our prefix on the chest so that we can take this Fizz's extra LE in terms of damage that we take, and it massively improves survivability. And that's the jewels. In terms of the tree, I mentioned that we're running Brittle, Scorch, and Sap. And it's not easy to apply that when you don't run an elemental skill. So we're basically, all of our damage comes from our bow. So to get it up, you want to run 50% increase effect of non-damaging ailments with crit here, and 40% increase effect of non-damaging ailments here. As long as you have T3 or more cold damage on your bow, and you've got your LE bow at around 1000 DPS, you should be putting about 4 brittle on an enemy, which with this setup gives you a 100% crit chance. You also should be getting around 20% scorch and nearly max sap. So this is just a good way to get tons of damage into the build without spending a lot of money. The only real downside is that you lose chill. So chill is very handy because it does make bosses so much easier. But I would think it's at least 20% more DPS running this jewel over not running it. So yes, we lose out on chill, but we'll be melting enemies much, much quicker. In terms of Pantheons, it's up to you. You can either run Arakali to get lots less damage taken in general. But for mapping, I think it makes sense to run Lunaris. More movement speed, more fizz reduction, and then other damage reduction across the board. And then I run Exile maps, I'm running Burning Ground. You can pick any one you want if you're running a different type of map. So we'll just quickly run over the cluster jewels on the build because you've got a couple of options. Now at the time of recording, both these cluster jewels are less than 2 divines for all of them. But I know what happens sometimes when a video comes out, very specific cluster jewels all get bought off the market and then they're suddenly up to like 3 or 4 divines when really they're not worth that much. It's just the influx of buyers come in when there isn't people who are discovering or selling the item. So I've got 2 different versions for you. The first one is with the specific cluster jewels that I would look for. And they are both bow clusters. One is Arcing Shot, Drive the Destruction, and Martial Prowess. 8 passives, you take all of them. And the other is Arcing Shot, Fuel the Fight, Martial Prowess. Again, take all the nodes. When I say take all nodes, you obviously don't need to complete all the small nodes. So the reason we go for both clusters, we get Life Leech with Drive the Destruction. We get Mana Leech with Fuel the Fight. And that means you don't have to go up here to get any sort of leech nodes. And then really, the other ones don't matter. I'd always make sure you have Arcing Shot because it's really good. And then I always look for Martial Prowess as a third because it's one you can actually path to. But they're not the be-all and end-all. You essentially need Drive the Destruction and Fuel the Fight. You could even get them on one cluster, and then that sort of solves a lot of the issues. So just in case these clusters are expensive, sorry, this medium cluster you want repeat or streamlined. These are easy to just alt roll yourself or just buy them. They shouldn't be too expensive. And then I've got a 1 cluster version here. Now, the one with the 1 cluster, you're actually going up and taking leech, you're getting life, and you're getting another jewel socket here. But then here you're just putting in another jewel. So this is like a 1 cluster, no medium cluster setup. And this is where you would look to get Arcing Shot and basically anything. Calamitous is probably good because it gives us non-damaging elements, elemental damage, and no one wants this node, so it's cheap. So this jewel of Arcing Shot, Martial Prowess, and Calamitous should always be less than a Divine because it's not that desirable. But again, if they start to go up, maybe just going to have to look for yourself and see what selection of cluster jewels is available. So you are going to need to run at least 1 cluster, otherwise you can't get all the jewel sockets you need to socket the jewels in the build unless you want to give up the Watcher's Eye. But that kind of gives us damage, mana, energy shield, not that that matters, and life. So you are going to have to run 1 large cluster, but I think with all the different combinations that can work on the build, there should always be something affordable. The version I would recommend is definitely the 2 cluster. It's slightly less life, but it's a lot more DPS. If you want to be a bit safer and weren't as bothered about DPS, you could go 1 cluster and then path up here to get some life and leech. It's totally up to you. So as I said, in total, the build is not cheap. It's still 30 to 40 divines, and I would say this is sort of an entry-level Omniscience character. Now, obviously, Omni eats up about 15 divines of that budget. So outside of Omniscience, you're probably talking 20-odd divines to get the build going with all this gear. But it does feel really, really good, as showcased in the highlights earlier. So what would I recommend you do if you've never played Tornado Shot and you've seen this guide and you're like, I want to play that? I'll link a video in the description. I would recommend that you start with that unless you've already got 40 divines to get this build going. Last thing you want to do is probably have 20 divines, buy Omniscience, and then you've got 5 divines to buy the rest of your gear. I think you're going to have quite a bad time. However, the video I've linked for a cheaper version also comes with its own farming strat that should have you farming around 4 divines an hour. So let's say in 5 or 6 play sessions, you've got enough to then sell the gear so you can get some more currency back and then go and start transitioning into Omniscience. And then once you've got enough for this version and you've got it going, it's then a case of upgrading each item bit by bit. So take your quiver, for example, you want the same, but with an arrow. With your bow, again, the same, but with 1 or, if you're really rich, 2 arrows. Things like getting your implicits up to a higher tier. If you couldn't afford the Tornado Shot enchantment before with the extra projectile, work towards that. Do you want to work towards your Forbidden Flame and Flesh tools? Because they ultimately are good. It all depends the content you want to do. So this character here does everything I would want to do in terms of a mapping environment. It will do invitations. You may take the odd death on invitations, but it will get them done super, super easy. And if that's all you want to do you need to then go spending loads more money on the character, especially if you're someone that might want to go on and play a different character? That's it for the video. The POB will be in the description. And I mentioned there is full notes to how to craft each item, or if you're buying it, what you're looking for, and then generally what stats you're looking for when you're finished building the character. I hope this video has helped people out. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.